This is a key to section 2.8 part 4, and on this worksheet you're given the endpoints of the diameter of a circle, and you're asked to use that information to find the equation of a circle in standard form. Alright, so just remember a couple of things. That standard form for equation of a circle is this. So it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Now notice it's r squared, not r, but r squared. So hk is the center of the circle, and then the radius is r. And in order to write the equation of a circle in standard form, you have to know two things. You have to know the center and the radius. So if you look at this example here, at these problems, you don't know the center, nor do you know the radius. But if you look at the circle itself, so let's say, let's go ahead and look at the first one. So the first one, we have the point 6,3. So 6,3 is here. And we have the point 8,2, which is here. Now it's not the diameter is very short, so it's not going to be, the circle I draw is not going to be that great. But 6,3, 8,2. Now this is the diameter of that circle. And so if I were to draw the circle as best I can, something like this, this is the circle that I'm looking at this point. All right, now it could have been a little bit better, but we're going to use that as the idea. All right, you have to remember something about high school geometry or middle school geometry, whatever, wherever you learn this information that I'm about to tell you. The diameter of a circle, and there are an infinite number of diameters, so all these are diameters. So I'm going to draw all these diameters the best I can. So all these are diameters. And notice all these diameters intersect at the same point. And that point right here is called the center. So that point of intersection of all these diameters is called the center of the circle. And notice that in order to find the equation of the circle in standard form, I've got to know the center. Well, what else do you know about the center? Well, the center is the midpoint of this diameter. All these diameters, the midpoint is the center. So what we got to do here is, for this problem, is we got to find the midpoint, and that's going to be the center. The other thing we have to find is the radius. We have to find the radius. Well, all these are radii right here. From the center to a point of the circle is a radius, and there are an infinite number of radii. You'll notice that all of these radii have the same length. So if I can find the length of the diameter, then I can find the length of the radius. All right, so the other thing we know is that the radius is half the diameter. So once I find the diameter, so if I look at this, the length of this diameter, if I divide it by 2, that's going to be the length of the radius. So the radius is half the diameter. So the diameter divided by 2, or you can say 1/2 times the diameter. Okay, so if I'm going to find the length of the diameter, then I've got to also use the distance formula. So given two points and a plane, given 2 points, x1, y1, x2, y2, I can find the distance between these 2 points. Remember, the distance formula says this: the distance between any 2 points in a plane is the square root of, and then you subtract the x coordinates from each other, and then you square it, and then you subtract the y coordinates from each other, and whatever that is, you're going to square it. You're going to add them together, and then the square root. The center, remember, is the same thing as the midpoint of the diameter. So the midpoint formula is and that's where you're going to add the x's together, add the x coordinates together. So x1 plus x2, divide by 2, midpoint, middle, take half, and then you add your y coordinates together and divide by 2. So this is all information you're going to need. You're going to need to do these problems here. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and label these. So this would be x1, y1, and then x2, y2. All right, so again, if I'm going to find the equation of a circle in standard form, so I'm going to write it like this. I've got to know the center and the radius. All right, so let's go ahead and find the center. So remember the center of the circle is going to be the midpoint of this diameter. So let's find the center first. So we're going to say 6 plus 8 divided by 2, comma, and then 3 plus 2 divided by 2. So that's going to be 6 plus 8 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 3 plus 2 is 5, and so I get 5 halves. So just go ahead and leave it as a fraction, as an improper fraction in this case. So I found the center, which is going to be the midpoint of this diameter. Okay. Now let's find the length of the diameter. So the diameter is going to be the square root of, and then I'm going to subtract the x coordinates from each other. So let's start with 8. So we're going to say 8 subtract 6. Now it really didn't matter whether you subtracted 6 from 8 or 8 from 6. It does not matter because in the end you're squaring, and it's going to be positive anyway. So it does not matter. See, the order in which you subtract these does not matter because you're squaring it. Plus, and then again, since I started with 8, I could have started with 3 for the y's. It does not matter because you're squaring. So 2 subtract 3, I'm just keep it in order, squared. So this becomes the square root of 8 subtract 2 is 8 subtract 6 rather is 2, so put that in parentheses, squared, plus 2 subtract 3 is a negative 1, put that in parentheses, squared, because remember there's a difference between saying negative 1 squared versus negative 1 in parentheses squared. This right here, the only thing negative 1 squared versus negative 1 squared in parentheses. This right here, if you put that in your calculator, you're going to get a negative 1 because you're telling the calculator square 1 first and then take the opposite. So you got to be careful. If you're using your calculator, you got to make sure that this is in parentheses because this right here is really this. This right here, rather, is really this, not this. So negative 1 times itself is a positive 1. So I get 4 plus 1, so I get the square root of 5. So that's your diameter. All right, so that's the length of the diameter. Now remember, in order to use this formula, you got to know the radius. You have to know the radius. So the radius then would be the diameter divided by 2. Okay, now here's what I have so far. What I have so far, and it's a good idea to write this out like this. What I have so far is this. I have x minus h, so this is your h and this is your k, 7 squared, plus y minus 5 halves squared equal the radius, which is this, not this, which is this, the square root of 5 divided by 2 squared. All right, now let's go ahead and rewrite this. So this is going to be x minus 7 squared plus y minus 5 halves squared equal, now remember, the square root of 5 divided by 2 times itself, square root of 5 divided by 2 times itself, the square root of 5 and the square root of 5 is 5, 2 times 2 is 4, so I get 5 fourths. So that goes here. So x minus 7 squared plus y minus 5 halves squared equal 5 fourths. So don't forget when you rewrite this that these binomials are supposed to be squared, so don't leave them without being squared, and then that's 5 fourths. All right, so that's the answer to number 1. You're going to do the same process with number 2. So number 2, we have this. All right, let's look at number 2. So in this case, the endpoints of the diameter are negative 5, 1, and 1, 3. So remember, just like we did in the previous example, we got to find the center of this circle, and we also need to know the radius. And so since this is the diameter, the center is the midpoint of this diameter. So the center, we're going to use the midpoint formula, will be, you're going to add remember you're going to add your x's together, your x coordinates together, divide by 2, and then add your y coordinates, divide by 2. And so I get negative 5 plus 1, divide by 2, comma, and then 1 plus 3, divide by 2. And so the center would be negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2. 1 plus 3 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that's your center. Okay, now we got to find the length of the radius. Remember, if this is the diameter, we find the length of the diameter, and the radius, remember, is the diameter, length of the diameter divided by 2, or 1/2 times the diameter. So let's find the length of the diameter. So the diameter, and to do that, we're going to use the distance formula. And so I get the square root of, and then you subtract your x coordinates from each other. So I'm going to say 1 subtract a negative 5 squared, plus, and then let's subtract the y coordinates. 3 subtract 1 squared. All right, now we have 1 subtract negative 5. This means 1 plus 5, which is 6. And I got to square this 6, plus 3 subtract 1 is 2, and 2 is being squared. So I get the square root of 6 squared is 36, plus, and then 2 squared is 4, and so I get the square root of 40. All right, so that's the length of the diameter. Now don't simplify this, because in the end, you're going to be, right here, you're going to be squaring the square root of 40, and then the square root of 40 times the square root of 40 is just 40. So just leave it as the square root of 40. All right, so once you find the length of the diameter, then let's find the radius, the length of the radius. So the radius would be the diameter divided by 2. All right, now don't make the mistake and reduce the 2 and the 40, because you can't. This is not 40. This is the square root of 40. If that was 40, just 40, there's just a rational number 40, then you could say 2 and the 40 is 20. But this is not a rational number. That's an irrational number. All right, so you cannot reduce this. All right, but anyway, so that's the square root of 40 over 2 is the radius. Okay, now, just like we did this, right here, let's go ahead and rewrite it before you put your answer. So, all right, so I'm going to get x minus h, remember the center, this is your h, this is your k. So x minus a negative 2 squared plus y minus 2 squared. So remember, it's x minus h, y minus k. Don't forget about the squaring, though. Equal the radius, go ahead and rewrite it like this, the square root of 40 divided by 2, and that's being squared. All right, now, go ahead and rewrite this. Don't leave it as x subtract negative 2. You got to rewrite this as x plus 2 squared plus, and then y minus 2 squared equal. Now let's kind of figure out what this part is. So the square root of 40 divided by 2 times itself, square root of 40 divided by 2 times the square root of 40 divided by 2. The square root of 40 times the square root of 40 is 40. 2 times 2 is 4, so that's just 10. So this right here is 10, and that's what goes here. So x plus 2 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 10. All right, number 3. So again, just like in all the other problems, we got to find the center of this circle, which is the midpoint of this diameter. So the center, remember this is x1, y1, x2, y2. Then basically you're just going to plug these back into your formulas. So you're going to need all these to do these problems. All right, so the center, you're going to add your x's together, your x coordinates together. So negative 7 plus a negative 1 divided by 2, and then your y coordinates, negative 4 plus 0 divided by 2. So negative 7 and a negative 1 is a negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 is a negative 4. Negative 4 plus 0 is a negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2. So there's your center. All right, then the only other thing I need to know is the radius. Well, if I can find the length of the diameter, then the radius is half of that. So let's find the length of the diameter using the distance formula. So the diameter will be the square root of, okay, now in this case, you're going to subtract your x-coordinates. So you're going to say -7, subtract a -1, subtract a -1 squared. So -7, subtract a -1 squared, plus a -4, subtract your y-coordinate, subtract 0 squared. All right, so that'd be square root of -7 subtract -1. Remember, -7 subtract -1 means -7 plus the opposite of -1. So that's -7 plus 1, which is -6. So that's -6 squared plus, and then -4 subtract 0 is a -4, and that's being squared. So I get the square root of -6 times itself is 36, not negative. This should always be positive or 0. Plus, and then -4 times itself is 16. So 36 plus 16 is the square root of 52. All right, 52. Okay, now that's the length of the diameter. Now don't simplify this because at some point you will be squaring the radius. So just leave it as square root. Okay, so the radius, the length of the radius then would be the square root of 52, the length of the diameter divided by 2. Again, don't reduce this because that's not 52, that's the square root of 52. Those are two different numbers. All right, so then we're going to get, so let's go ahead and take this information and substitute it into our formula for the standard form of the equation of a circle. So remember, this is now h and this is k. So I get x minus a -4 squared, x minus a -4 squared, so x minus h squared, plus y minus k, k is -2 squared, equals the radius, which is this, square root of 52 divided by 2 squared. So then x subtract -4, you have to rewrite this as x plus 4. And then y subtract -2, you have to rewrite this as y plus 2 squared. Don't forget they're being squared. Equal, all right, now let's go ahead and figure out what this is. So this right here means the square root of 52 divided by 2 times the square root of 52 divided by 2. Square root of 52 times itself is 52. 2 times 2 is 4. And so if I go ahead and simplify this, square root of 52 divided by 4, here's your calculator, 52 divided by 4, I get 13. So that's 13. So then this right here becomes 13. Not the square root of 13, 13. All right, so the answer then goes here. All right, so it will be x plus 4 squared plus y plus 2 squared equal 13. Okay, so that's going to take care of this key.